What's up, guys? It's Ron from Ron Rohde Law, and today we have an incredible guest speaker with us. His name is John Kirby. He is a former federal prosecutor in the state of California.
Client who had submarines that were taking cocaine from Colombia to Mexico, real submarines. But it was my belief that he was being paid by Sinaloa, and that's why we could get no information from him related to the Sinaloa cartel. And he's since died somewhat mysteriously.
And now he focuses his practice primarily representing white-collar defendants and cartel. What led him to his career choices, and maybe share some of his most exciting stories with the business that is the cartel. So, John, thanks for joining.
Well, thanks for having me. I do appreciate it. Went to law school at Cornell University, which is part of the reason I'm here, of course. Came to San Diego, clerked for one of the district judges, and then went to Covington Burling, which was, White Shoe law firm, and honestly, a bit boring. So after 4 years, I had the opportunity to come to the U.S. Attorney's Office back in San Diego, where the weather was nicer. So I took that opportunity. Started doing criminal cases exclusively, large criminal cases using wiretaps, actually attacking the primary cartel in Tijuana. It was known as the Arellano Felix brothers. They had run Tijuana for better than a decade. They were quite violent, responsible for hundreds of deaths, often by torture, thousands of tons of cocaine coming through the San Ysidro port of entry, which is the largest land port in the world, and is where probably 70+% of the cocaine and other strong narcotics come in through the border. Took on that cartel, myself and another prosecutor, Laura Duffy, put together a case against those folks. It was the first time it had been done, a grand indictment against the entire three brothers plus their lieutenants. Sent it to Mexico, got them all arrested. I spent a lot of time in Mexico City dealing with essentially their version of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, because they really do still, even in Mexico City, take the afternoon off, and then you're sitting in a conference room at 11 o'clock at night thinking, why am I not asleep now? But that's just their way. The primary rival to them was the Sinaloa cartel. And honestly, I felt when I spoke to the head of CIEDO, which is what it was called at that point, their FBI, he would give me information on the Arellanos, but he had no information on Sinaloa.
So he actually had some loyalty. He respected one of his employers.
But it was my belief that he was being paid by Sinaloa, and that's why we could get no information from him related to the Sinaloa cartel. And he's since died somewhat mysteriously. And it's in layers. I mean, the local cops in TJ for, the lieutenants of the people who are the lieutenants for the people who are running the place. But yeah, all the way up the chain. I mean, that expression that's been bandied about, plata or pluma, silver or lead, that's a real thing. And I've dealt with that as a prosecutor and as a defense attorney. So getting back to it, the narrative. So we got these people in jail. I actually left before most of them came to the United States. I left the U.S. Attorney's Office, started my own practice, started doing a lot of white collar crime, from something simple like insider trading for securities fraud, or complex things like medical kickbacks. The whole PPP, that whole program during COVID was rife with fraud. I've represented federal agents who were stealing money that they were supposed to turn in. They actually catch the people going south with money that was headed for the cartels. They would grab it. They wouldn't report it. They would keep it themselves. Several high-level members of the Sinaloa cartel. Some of these folks are violent. Some are not. I mean, quite frankly, the Sinaloa cartel is not as violent person by person as the Arellano Felix brothers were. There's still violence that goes on, and there's still some of it that's horrific. I mean, I was talking about this to somebody recently, and they said, "Oh yeah, like the things you see on TV," and it's like, no, the stuff that goes on, they wouldn't dare show on TV.
Wow.
raise hairs on the back of your neck.
That kind of opens the next question, which is, do you feel any personal safety concerns for you or your loved ones? Do you feel it more as a prosecutor going against them, or do you feel it more pressure representing them?
Definitely more as a defense attorney.
As a defense. So you're actually aligned with them and you feel more pressure, as opposed to, do they just treat you like you're just doing your job? They think you're part of, just serving justice? And
well, no, it's not that simple. There was an individual in the early 90s. His name was Kiki Camarena. He was a DEA agent, and he was kidnapped, tortured, and killed in Baja California. And that's just, his death tore the cartels apart. I mean, the United States went insane. They kidnapped people and brought them to the United States. It was just like a wake-up call for the cartels. It's like, leave federal law enforcement alone, because we cannot deal with the backlash. And so honestly, as a prosecutor going down there, I never worried, because I was sort of had a shield because of that. And I do believe that even today, as a defense attorney, I still have some of that shield with me, because I'm a former federal prosecutor. Now, I have received, it was several years ago, I was sitting at my desk, and I got this cryptic call from an FBI agent. And he just said, look, we need to let you know that we received credible information that your life may be in danger. And of course, I was like how? Like who? Like what?
yeah.
And he said, we don't have to tell you any of that. We just have to let you know that there's a credible threat against your life. Thank you very much.
They just drop that bomb on your lap and then walk away.
That's all they had to do is that to fulfill their obligations. They're obviously up on a wiretap. I talked to an informant who had said somebody isn't happy with John Kirby, whether it's the result I got in a case or whether I was representing somebody that they were against. I never found out, and quite frankly, I was in Tijuana the next week.
Wow.
I can't be concerned with that sort of thing.
For a lot of lawyers or people watching this that are not lawyers, there are a lot of crazy clients. There are people that, are prone to violence. And, just statistically, I don't want to speak for you, but like family law, that has the highest rate of lawyer deaths, homicides, whatever, just because of the sheer numbers, but on a per capita basis. And so for people watching this that might think, oh, John, you're putting yourself in the lion's den and you're representing these, quote, potentially violent people. I think the reality is, statistically, you're more likely to be attacked or harmed by a family law opposing party or your own client who's unhappy with the way, and the emotions and just the proximity. Something that is perceived as dangerous is probably, and you're telling us, you didn't feel that same level of danger as maybe a family law attorney or.
I agree with you 100%. And I can tell you just a very brief story that my ex-wife and I, years and years ago, she was a judge, she still is a judge, but they tend to start the judges in family law because nobody likes to do it. And so she was a family law judge, and we went, lived in a middle-class neighborhood, went to lunch, or actually dinner, and went into the restaurant. She looked around and saw one of the litigants and said, we have to go. I can't stay here because I don't know what this woman's going to do to me if I stay. So I agree with you 100%. I mean, I've seen it through her eyes and through family lawyers that I know. I mean, especially when you have kids involved. I mean, people will get violent if they think you're taking their kids away. That's a whole lot different than you trying to put them in jail.
For putting them in jail for something that, I think I will just put it out there, a lot of people do a lot of bad things.
Cases where somebody comes across the border, they have 50 pounds of meth. Okay, that's the case, and you're just going to have to do with what you can. But as far as the proactive cases, I mean, there's a very arduous process that people go through before they're allowed by the office to indict someone. So, I mean, there's the indictment review. You have to write a very long memo. So, what I tell people is, if you get indicted proactively at least in the Southern District of California, where I do most of my business, you're not just guilty, you're 3 times guilty. Because
Right.
I've seen the process. Like I said, it's not like you're just guilty. It's like beyond a shadow of a doubt. And oftentimes it's get a better sentence. I mean, sometimes it's go to trial. Too bad, let's see if we can twist things the right way. But very often, it's get the best result. I mean, I had a client several years ago who had submarines that were taking cocaine from Colombia to Mexico, real submarines. And it was all a wiretap investigation. He had been caught crossing the United States, and he was arrested a little prematurely, and there were other wiretap cases going on, and he should have gotten 30 years. Okay. But I knew that I could cause all those other wiretap investigations to be exposed should I so choose. And
Based on like discovery or based on, okay.
Yeah, I received a wiretap affidavit, and when you do a wiretap, you have to put in all the prior intercepts and all the ongoing intercepts in that affidavit. And I got an affidavit that had blacked out for half of it, which I knew were ongoing interceptions. So I told the prosecutor, who was a little young and inexperienced, look, I can get all this unredacted. I can force the judge to do this. So you better give me a very good deal or I'm going to. And so this client who, guidelines should have been up around 30 years, ended up pleading to 100 kilos of marijuana and a 5-year deal.
Wow.
And he was overjoyed to get that. And we still keep in close contact. And he feels like he owes me a wonderful favor still for that.
Yeah, you gave him 25 years of his life.
Yeah.
Incredible.
But the point is, oftentimes it's that, or it's, listen, you better cooperate and, cut your time down at the expense of your co-defendants. That's another avenue. It's not one that I push on people, but if they are, if they're so, so inclined, I do help them travel through those waters to make sure they get them as much time off as possible.
We see these things kind of on the news, but we're so disconnected from the 3 to 5 years of legal work that happens after the headlines. The headlines are just a blip in time. Do you think that legalization of marijuana has an impact on the cartel or the amount of trafficking or cases that you see?
I think, you have legalization, state by state, and it's still, look, the cartels still live on marijuana. Cocaine loads are a big deal. When they come in from Colombia or Costa Rica or Panama, which are waypoints, it's a big event. A plane comes through or a Ponga boat with 2 tons of cocaine comes up on the black market here in California. It also goes to all the states where it's not legal.
Right.
So that's still sort of the bread and butter for the cartels. When it is made legal federally, it's going to have a major impact on the cartels. And in fact, I was speaking several years ago with a group of Mexican lawyers in Mexico City who were frightened by the prospect of marijuana being legalized in the United States overall, because they were afraid the cartels, and I've actually seen a little bit of this, the cartels still need to make money, and they were afraid they were going to be more focused on kidnapping as opposed to drug trafficking, because the marijuana would no longer be the option it is today.
And that's local kidnapping, right?
Yes,
not necessarily tourists. It's just kind of higher value local citizens.
Right. They don't kidnap people in the United States. That's a very rare thing. Mexican, the high level folks are terrified of U.S. law enforcement, and that's why it's very rare that you see violence or high level people up here in the United States, because they're happy in Mexico. They can, for the most part, pay off the Mexican authorities, and they feel safe. Up in the United States, they don't feel safe. They know they can't pay people off, and they know how how drastic the U.S. feels about cartel-like violence in the United States. I've had cases. I had a case, a murder for hire case, and it was one of the few state cases that I've done because I don't do those very often. And it had cartel implications. And when I was sitting down with the prosecutor and the prosecutor's boss, I mean, that was, the big thing. His boss said, "Listen, this is cartel violence. We don't like cartel violence here in the United States. We will not put up with this." So, I mean, it put it to a whole other level. And the cartels understand that. They're not people who run those cartels. I mean, the people at the top edge are not stupid. I mean, they may be ruthless, but they're not stupid. And they don't want to get caught and they don't want to go to jail for 20 years.
Yeah, that kind of goes to my earlier comment about the business of cartels is they are very sophisticated and they have accounting and they have, labor relations and they have inventory control, both for product, but other inventory. And then do they treat their lawyers in a similar respect of, hey, we can't just lean on John and put the screws on him over and over and over again because he is an employee or a contractor of the company in the same way that U.S. companies treat their lawyers? Or do you feel like it's do they treat them more like Mexican lawyers or like U.S. Fortune 500 lawyers?
They treat them differently. I mean, actually being a criminal lawyer in Mexico is a very dangerous profession. Mexican criminal defense attorneys get assassinated right along. I mean, Benjamin Arellano was the head of the Arellano Felix cartel, and I can probably name 3 to 5 lawyers who were killed who represented him in Mexico. In the U.S., I mean, look, there are people who have come close to being what you would call in Italian Cosa Nostra terms, consiglieres, and some of them have been prosecuted because there's a line. There's a line between helping them out when they are, they committed a crime versus advising them as how to not get caught. For example, when I was at the U.S. Attorney's Office, and this is a small example, but there was an attorney who got caught on a wiretap advising his clients how far up the coast they had to go with their go fast boats before they could come to shore with the methamphetamine that they had. And that is advising someone how not to get caught. And that person could have been prosecuted. So you have to, with cartels, there's a line. You cannot tell them, okay, do it this way and you won't get caught. No, you cannot. And that's something you always have to keep in mind when you're dealing with cartels.
Yeah, I think as a lawyer, I kind of recall that distinction. Past crimes, you can talk anything and everything about. It's the future crimes that really is a distinction. Are they talking about something tomorrow or are they talking about something they did already?
Right. I mean, you want to use a simpler, more black and white context. Somebody comes to you and says, "Look, I want to murder my wife. I need you to tell me how I'm not going to get caught." Okay. I mean, every lawyer would know, well, I can't do that. Right. So it's not quite as black and white with the drug traffickers, but it's the same concept. It's like, no, I can't tell you how not to get caught dealing drugs or laundering money. And if you do that, then you're part of the conspiracy now.
Well, so it's funny you bring up the money laundering. How prevalent is U.S. based legitimate operations or pseudo legitimate operations that are money laundering? I think it's a joke, but my wife and I will always drive by some high-end restaurant that is empty. And
yes, I mean there are myriad ways of laundering drug money. I've represented several different money launderers. People, some of whom don't touch drugs and have never touched drugs. And I mean, some of it, money laundering is simple. They stuff it in a car and they cross the border with it. Okay. But there are just so many different ways to use the banking system here in the United States. Restaurants, because they're a cash business, casinos because they're a cash business. Those are excellent ways to launder money. But I've sat down with very smart individuals who've been cooperating. I mean, I had an individual who was arrested in Atlanta, and prosecutors came from all over the country to listen to him explain how he used the U.S. banking system to get money, dirty money, from the United States to some quasi-legitimate company in Mexico, millions of dollars. So I mean, the money I mean, that's the prize. I mean, a drug trafficker he doesn't like either one, but he would much rather have his drugs seized than have his money seized, because the money represents all the work that's been done. And now that's the thing, right? And so if he loses his drugs, it's like, okay, I lost my drugs, but he's sold the drugs now, he's gone through that, and now he has the money, and now at the back end, right before he gets it, it goes away. That is to them, that is the worst thing.
I mean, so you mentioned like the restaurants and the casinos. I can't help but my mind goes to this. Are you familiar with that Netflix show Ozark?
Yes, very familiar. Quite a funny show.
How much is realistic versus creative license?
Well, I tend not to watch those types of shows. I mean, the drug shows, the cartel shows. I mean, so much of it is made up, and I can see. And when I watch them with my significant other, she hates it because she's like, "Stop telling me it's not like that. It's not like that." There was a lot of creative license. I mean, I enjoy the Ozarks just as a show. I enjoy the actors. I enjoy the folks. But the basic premise was correct.
Okay.
The basic premise was correct. I mean, the way they were doing it is one of the ways that it gets done.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating. I mean, I'm kind of the same way, again, with the legal background. My wife likes Suits, or she was watching that show. And they would have, of course, these lawyers that simultaneously do billion-dollar mergers, M&A acquisitions with sophisticated industries. And then the next day they're in court doing a family law custody. And I'm saying, what? Yes, there are big law lawyers that do family law. Yes, there are big law lawyers. It is never the same person at all. And then they've got litigation going on too for some, crazy court or breach of contract that goes from discovery of the breach to, oh, we're in a hearing and now we're in this trial. And I'm saying, what? That would take 1 year. That would take 2 years to get to a point where anybody is talking in front of a judge other than to say, Your Honor, we're appearing for the plaintiffs. You don't even get like pretrial motions to agree on a discovery schedule until like months in. And so I tell them, like, oh, that couldn't happen in a week. That, like, the judges are not just sitting there waiting for these cases coming onto their dock and saying, yep, let's schedule it tomorrow. Let's schedule it the day after.
Right.
One thing I do like to always open up for my lawyer guests is, what kind of advice do you have for somebody who's maybe interested in either the prosecution side or eventual defense? What would you tell your younger version self if you're either in law school or, thinking about law school?
Well, if you're going to law school, if you're in law school, I mean, intern at the public defender's office, intern at the U.S. Attorney's office, intern for the local DA's office. Get on your feet. One of the things that you have to do early, I mean, honestly, I don't do it as much as I used to, but to be, whether it's a defense attorney or a prosecutor, you have to be able to stand up and speak. I mean, I spent the first 4+ years, at a big white shoe law firm, and, it was all writing memos, and gosh, maybe you got to write a motion, and wow, what a thing that was. And then when I came to the U.S. Attorney's office, the next day I was in magistrate court arguing bond. Okay, you've got to know how to stand up and speak. So when you have the opportunity, make sure when you're in law school, you take the practice classes, you take You do the moot court, you know, whether, and you know, I wasn't born to speak. I mean, that didn't come easy to me. It was a learned process for me. But it's a process you need to learn because you can't be a defense attorney or a prosecutor if you don't know how to stand up and speak in court. So that's one thing. The other thing is, I mean, you just have to be able to just gut it out because, you know, those big firms, which very do, rarely do criminal law. I mean, they pay a lot more at the low end of things. I mean, you know, federal prosecutors don't make near what, you know, a partner in a big law firm makes. So you got to make that choice. Are you going to make? Are you doing this for money, or are you doing it because you really enjoy getting in court? You really, yeah. My practice is infinitely more interesting than it would have been if I had stayed at Covington and Burling. But even as a defense attorney, I don't make the kind of money that I would have made there.
Just because their clients have the wherewithal, so they're stroking 100K retainers for, you know, just kind of every single matter. Is that why they just pay more? Or
look, I was helping represent Exxon, okay, and you know, I represent some high-end cartel people. I represent lawyers. I represent some folks that have a fair amount of money, but I don't represent Exxon. And you know, and those who do are usually at the big firms. But you know, Exxon might need a criminal, have a criminal slash regulatory matter over here. That's not most of what they do. Most of what they do is in just a vast amount of insurance claims and this and that and regulatory stuff. So I don't have, and most, you know, 99.9% of the folks who practice criminal law are not dealing with Exxon. They're not dealing with big companies. They're dealing with individuals. And individuals just don't have $1 million or $2 million to give you. And you have to, you know, look at them and sort of eyeball, okay, how much can these people afford?
there's a lot of price discrimination. Yeah. So you do vary that based on what you think they can afford versus what the time and the type of client they are. So
Well, I mean, it's interesting because it kind of breaks along cultural lines. I prefer hourly because I think it's actually fair to the client. However, cartel type people and folks, Latin folks in general, they want a flat rate.
mm-hmm.
And I give them a flat rate, but I tell them, look, if you want a flat rate, I have to build in how bad can this be?
Right.
Can this be all the way to trial? And I have to deal with experts, and I have to deal with this, and I have to deal with that. And then it pleads out. And guess what? You know,
No refunds.
all that fat goes to me anyway. And I have convinced here and there some, you know, cartel type people to go hourly. And usually they end up paying me less than they would have if I had gotten a flat fee from them.
Sure.
So but when you're getting a flat fee, you are sort of looking at them and like thinking, okay, so what's their wherewithal?
Well, that's good. That's a peek under the hood. So if anybody's watching and you need to hire a federal defense attorney, definitely go in your worst clothes and say, hey, you know, you're the best. I really want to hire you, but I don't have a ton of money.
That's happened to me.
Somebody's misled you.
A mom in particular, I was representing her son, or I was in the process of that. And I met with her in Mexico, in Tijuana, and she came in with these old jeans and kind of a worn shirt, and we set the price. And you know, from then on, when I saw her, she was in Chanel and with a bag that cost more than I had quoted her for the full price of the case. She just played me to the T.
Too funny. She knew what she was doing, but
yeah, absolutely.
That's okay. You know, I kind of respect that. I like people that know what they're doing and they are not trying to screw you, but they're going to get what they can get and play the game.
I respect her. I didn't feel cheated. I just thought, oh, well, you got me. Okay.
Yeah. I feel like in my practice, there's a lot of people that want discounts or they want some cheaper price. And the people that I respect the most is if I give you a little bit of discount or something off, pay promptly. And when they do pay promptly, it shows me that they appreciate and respect me. And I gave a discount and then they pay promptly. And I'm okay with that. But if the people want a discount and then they're slow to pay, that's the most irritating because you just want, I don't give any quarter the next time. So.
Right.
Well, John, thank you so much. This was a really fascinating discussion. I mean, you didn't disappoint with the stories. So if you want to get in touch with John, hopefully you don't need to. Maybe it's just legal advice, but I'll put his email and his website down below.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.
All right.